It seems the more and more time that you spend examining the state of the world, the more hopeless it kind of seems, right? Like if you spend any amount of time, social media, on the news, you're just kind of scrolling through and constantly seeing fight after fight after fight. And it's just really consistent, right? And it seems like culture's been trending this direction for a long time. Like if you were looking in 2010, you'd be like, yeah, there's a lot of disagreements, there's problems, but it wasn't necessarily anything like what we see today. 2015, we started to see some more trending this direction, but the last 5 years to 6 years has really just spiraled out of control, with COVID really becoming the focal point of the aggression of this scenario. And I wouldn't say that the average human being wants to wish people who think differently than to die. But I do start to feel, the more I talk to people and the more I watch any sort of news, that there's half of the world that would be just fine if the other half just didn't exist anymore. Which isn't a great way to live life together in community. And you'd think that this would just kind of be the worst of society, right? Like, I'm talking about the people that are trolling on the internet at all times, just trying to start fights, like not even arguing for things they believe in, but just trying to start fights because it's funny or fun. And I feel like we've all been there on some level where we've seen somebody post something dumb and you're like, I should probably make an example of this person. But I'm not talking about good-hearted trolling. I'm talking about like the neckbeards who live in their mom's basement. And if you have a neckbeard, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's this general trend, right? People that are just going hard to try and cause division and cause war at every turn, put out a statement out there just to start a fight, to see who will take the bait, who will get into a fight, who will further this notion of division in our society. And you would think this would be the primary personality that would be driving the problems of our society. And it may be. That does exist. But unfortunately, continually, the more I look and the more I engage and the more that I think about it, honestly, Christians tend to be at the center more and more of our cultural civil war that we seem to be fighting in the ideological sphere. It's not just people that you would expect to live in this divisive way, but it's increasingly people that would profess to follow a Jesus-based life. And I'm not making a statement for everyone here or for everyone that says that they're a Christian or follow Jesus, but I'm saying this is a trend in our culture, in our society. Think about it. Masks, politics, left, right, Trump, woke, vaccine mandates, all sorts of different ideological elements that we seem to have these different opinions on. And I see so often on social media people who say that they follow the same God arguing with each other and basically calling the other person a heretic, evil, or dangerous. How does that look to people from the outside? Not very well, I would think. There used to be this them versus us mentality when we would talk about the church. It was always kind of maybe the generation before mine, and for sure your generation is very much like culture is coming for us. We got to stand strong. They're taking prayer out of schools, out of public schools. That's the culture war is coming for the Christians. The church is under fire. We're going to be persecuted. And maybe there is some elements of that. We can argue back and forth onto the validity of that conversation. But what's changed in the last couple of years is I don't see it so much as culture versus the church, them versus us. It's becoming us versus us. We are at each other's throats. We see each other as the enemy. And that doesn't lend itself to success in our mission and just in following Jesus in general. It's not an outside attack, but it's become an internal civil war. And it's fought on the battlefield of social media, backroom conversations, and within the depths of our minds and our hearts, and the way that we think about our neighbor, our brothers, our sisters, and the people in the world around us. And that can't continue. So we're talking about division. Jeff, you're a pastor, you're saying we shouldn't be divided. Well, how does a Christian or someone who professes to follow a Jesus-based life, how do you justify denominations? Because there's a lot of them, right? Like you drive down the road, you're going to come across on one road probably 5 or 6 different denominations, 5 or 6 different churches. We've got, the Pentecostals, we've got Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, Reformed, Baptist, Alliance, Methodist, Moravian, and there's probably a whole different array of them that I'm not even listing off the top of my head right now. There's so many different ways of doing church. So how can anyone from the outside trust a community of people who believe in a God who is the same tomorrow, yesterday, and the same always, doesn't change, and he is who he is? We don't get to change who he is. So would it not be a direct violation of our own belief system, and would it not prove that we can't be trusted when we have so many differing variations on how to do this thing called a Jesus-based life? A lot of questions. Can we do that? Is it a group united or a group divided? Are we violating our beliefs? Are we no longer trustworthy? Let's look into it. Is there room for disagreement when we follow Jesus? Can we be on slightly different pages in certain areas and still be following the same God? Well, let's look to the Bible. In the second half of the Bible, the New Testament, there's a book called John. It was written by a guy that literally lived with Jesus, followed him everywhere. It's a first-hand account. We're going to look at John 17:20-24. It says this: Jesus is praying at this point. He says, I'm praying not only for these disciples, but also for all who will ever believe in me through their message. I pray that they will be all one, just as you and I are one, as you are in me, Father, and I am in you. And may they be in us so the world will believe you sent me. I've given them the glory you gave me, so they may be one as we are one. And I in them and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. Father, I want these whom you have given me to be with me where I am. Then they can see all the glory you gave me because you loved me even before the world began. So what's happening here? This is a pretty significant statement Jesus is making. He's actually not just praying for like the 12 disciples that followed him everywhere, the thousands of people that started to follow his lead and listen to his teachings. Jesus is praying for us. Jesus is praying for the future church, any person historically in the last 2,000 years and through the rest of human history who would profess to be a follower of a Jesus-based life, who subscribes to the way that Jesus has called us to through the Bible and through his own example. He's saying this and praying this to God for you and I who sit here today in this space, whether it's in person or whether you're online. He's talking about us. He's not just talking about the church or what we might categorize as small C church, the Project, Hope City, just a general church you might find on any street corner, but the big C church, the global community that's existed for the last 2,000 years, expressed in different cultures, different parts of the world, all focused in on one united front, which is to make Jesus known and to share the hope that comes from following a Jesus-based life. That's what Jesus is talking about. And what he's saying through this significantly important prayer is that he prays that we would be united, that we would be on the same page, that we would be one community together under one banner of one mission and under one banner of one God. Does that sound like the church you know today? How are you contributing to such a call? This goes into a depth that's pretty powerful, and it's when he says that I hope that that the church would be one just as we are one. He's praying to God, and you have to remember, Jesus is God incarnate. God come to earth in the form of a man. So when he's praying that to God and asking that we would be united the same way that God and Jesus are united, that's a pretty heavy load. That's a pretty big statement because they are literally the same. He's praying that we as the church globally would be on the same page to the point where it's like one unified mind, where we are together, where we have one focus. And that's really hard because we have all these interpersonal differences. We have different cultures. We come from different cultures. In Canada, we're not just in one culture with different opinions. We actually often come from different family situations from all over the world. In a multicultural society, things look different for one household than the next. How do we bring all of these different thought processes, these different ideologies, wow, I can't say that today, these different political backgrounds, how do we bring all of our perspectives together and be in this sense of unity that Jesus is praying for us to be and asking us to do today? Well, it's not easy. I don't think it was supposed to be. But let's look again. It says, may they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. One of the greatest things we're called to as the church is not just to love God. That is fundamentally the first thing. Our first call is to love God, is to worship God and encounter and live through His Holy Spirit. To know and believe in Jesus. But once we have that, the Great Commission, the calling, the mission of the church is to share the hope of a Jesus-based life with the world around it who doesn't know. That's why we say here at the project exists for those that aren't here yet. That's why we ask and we say, please invite your friends. That's why we say that we want to reach 1% of the young adults in Edmonton. That is the vision of the project. We exist for those that don't yet come here, who don't know the hope of a Jesus-based life. But what Jesus is expressing here is something very important, is that the world around us would see the love of God through the way that we love each other. Meaning that the baseline for sharing a Jesus-based life with people around us, for communicating the hope of the world, for the world, is that we choose unity together as a church community globally and interpersonally. The baseline for sharing the love of Jesus is to actually express genuine community and love to each other. And when the world sees that, they're going to understand that this is something I want to be a part of. The first thing that they're going to see is how we treat each other. They're going to see if we're on the same page. They're going to see if this looks like something that's actually legitimate, that's authentic, or if this is just something that we say that we have the same cross tattoo or necklace on our bodies, but we don't actually follow the same way of living, that we're not unified in any ways. And that will absolutely destroy our ability to share Jesus at a baseline level. We need to be able to move past our differences and choose unity when we can. The most important thing is that we reflect the way that Jesus lived his life. So what about denominations? Because, again, we haven't really addressed that. Are they good or are they bad? A lot of people would say they're bad. They make you look like this ununified, problematic situation. And on some levels, I see how that could be bad because it does create this perception that Christians just can't seem to get along. But can we? Well, there's been examples where this is actually a huge problem. In some places around the world, there's literally been physical civil wars that have been fought. If you look into the history of Ireland, there's been major battles, like literal infighting in that country because of the fight between different denominational groups. Very small differences between the two that are blended in with cultural differences that I can't even pretend to fully grasp without having lived there or knowing it. But I do know that there are places, multiple places around the world, that these small thin lines between ideologies, between theology, between the things that we believe and how we function, that have created literal war. Humans are great at making division. We tribalize, we separate, we try and find our teams, and then we need to kind of create enemies, and that's just how we've been all through our history. That's part of our human fallen brokenness. But when it seeps in, that can become a problem, and that goes into denominations as well. But that doesn't mean that denominations can't be a net gain, a positive for the church as well. Well, let's look into how this can be. They're good because they actually show a reflection of personalities, styles, and culture. It doesn't always mean that we don't agree or that we become enemies on these ideas, but sometimes it's just a reflection of where we come from and how we see the world at the time that we kind of developed our churches. It does happen that way sometimes. In fact, actually, a lot of North American denominations came out of a pushback against a state-centralized church. And if there's one thing that we can probably agree on across the world is there's very few times in human history where a centralized government-mandated church was the best way to do it. In fact, most of the time when church and state becomes unified as one, that's when the most horrible things were done in the name of Jesus. Again, not because that's what Jesus taught, but where governments and where different powerful organizations leverage the name of Jesus to push their own political or financial gain forward. So this is a way where we can actually decentralize. It's been different groups that have come out of different regions, and now with the globalization of the world, they kind of have spread out throughout the entire North American landscape. But that doesn't mean that they're not a part of the Christian church. It can be a positive thing. It can be a reflection of differences that are not necessarily the end of the world. And it also has allowed us to kind of keep some checks and balances as a decentralized organization. So, what differences are allowed and what aren't? Is it all just a free-for-all? Is there no standards? Well, let's look into that as well. Denominational differences within what would be categorized as a Christian church, they are largely defined by secondary theology. Theology being just a fancy word for saying how we think about God or what we believe about God. The person, the personality, the character, who God is. Secondary theology being not primary being the most important. And when I say this, what I'm saying is that there are essentials to the faith of being a Jesus-based Christian church that are non-negotiable, and they have to be at the center of a denomination, of a church, in order to be part of the Christian church, to truly follow Jesus. So what are a couple of those things? I'm talking about the Bible is God's word. It's inerrant. It's perfect. It is God's word spoken to us. It is God's word orchestrated, yes, through people, but he is the architect of it. The same way that an architect that built this building may not have laid every brick. Jesus didn't write out the entire Bible by hand, but he was the architect of it. You wouldn't say that the architect who built this building, even though he didn't put every brick and mortar, put every screw in every board, he wouldn't say that that person wasn't the architect or the person who planned and designed and made it as it is today. That is God with the Bible. That is one of the fundamental things that we believe. Also that Jesus had a virgin birth, a supernatural birth, died on a cross, and then of course rose again 3 days later, and comes down to one of the most fundamental things is that because of Jesus' overcoming death and defeating death and being God on earth, is that if we have relationship with him, if we follow Jesus, follow his example and live in relationship and accept what he did on the cross and accept our flaws, that we would actually have forever eternal life with him and very valuable life here on earth. These are the fundamentals. These are the non-negotiables. If you go to a church and they don't say those things, this is not a Christian church, and I would say we want to run the other direction. Those are primary theology. Secondary theology is things that are more expressive, cultural, might be things that aren't put out into directly in the Bible exactly how to do things, and we kind of just culturally come up with preferences. So what am I talking about? Baptism. Baptism, if you've never heard of it before, is a symbolic act, and we do it here all the time. And if you would like to get baptized, please come talk to us after or message us. We would love to do that. It's a symbolic act where here at the project, we dunk people in water to show that the old person is dead and you're coming back up, and it's in front of everybody, and when you come up, it's the new life. It represents that. It's an awesome celebration for all of us together to say, I am no longer who I used to be. I am now new in Jesus. Some places don't do that like we do, where it's adults. We say as an adult, you make the decision, and we go by full immersion. Some places will sprinkle water on a baby. There's baby baptisms. There's different ways of doing it. The Bible doesn't say, do it this way or else you're doing it wrong and you're sinning. You know, you can have different perspectives as to which one's better or which one we want to do. We kind of have to pick one. But that would be a difference between our church and some other good churches as well. We're not saying that that experience is sinful or wrong. We're just saying this is how we've chosen to do it. This is how we've chosen to express this part of the Bible. This is how we live this out. That is a secondary theology. That is not a fundamental. If we change each of those back and forth, that is not something that is worth dividing us to the point of becoming enemies. We can baptize each other differently and then come together on the street, high five, and say, we're on the same team, man. It's all good. We don't have to agree on absolutely everything. And we should actually find more ways to be unified than to make up new ways to be divided. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on that issue, but that's an example of a secondary theology that is not worth creating more barriers, more boundaries, and more division and infighting over. Pick your battles for when they matter. Because if you exhaust yourself on the things that don't matter, you won't have the energy to fight the battles that do. And that's how I feel, and that's how I see the world around us, and we're so often picking the secondary things and we're making them primary. We're finding ways to create division. We're finding ways to fight each other when we need to be saving the energy for the fights that will actually matter, that actually need to be stood up for at all points. It doesn't mean that we can't have conversations or debates about which one we should be doing, but there's so many examples well beyond just baptism and how we orchestrate and actually express that. There's so many things that we've decided at times are worth creating huge trenches in the way that we live and divisions between each other, and that just frankly it needs to stop. The world needs a unified church. The world needs a church that shows love to each other, and that then from there goes out and loves the world and serves the world and is Jesus to the world around it that needs it more than ever. And we are the answer to so many of those problems, but if we can't get on the same page, church, we're not going to be able to save the world around us in the way that we need to. We're not going to be able to be the positive salt and light to the world around us into the dark places if we spend all of our time, even just not just verbally or on Facebook, within our own hearts, within our own minds, fighting and hating our neighbor. Hating the person who sits at the other side of the church is not a way to bring Jesus to the world. So, how do we do that? Well, denominations are a very small example. That's kind of more of a historical problem. Because really, as I meet other pastors from other denominations, we have lots of different groups within the church world, even just in Edmonton, where we'll go and meet with different pastors from different denominations. One thing that all pastors seem to be able to agree on is that coffee is good. We may argue, we've got our silos there as well, like maybe get into a couple fights. Someone likes Tim Hortons, and we're just like, okay, I don't know if we can be friends, but that's beside the point. But we will go for coffee, and we'll actually just hang out, and that's great. And that's been a trend kind of as the generations have gone. Denominations aren't a huge issue. So does that mean there's no division? Well, no, because I actually think what's happened now is we've moved denominations and the division that used to come from that and from the way that those were orchestrated into our ideologies and our politics. We're creating ideological denominations within the Christian church where we look at different elements of what it means and how we're navigating society, and we decide that if somebody thinks differently, just the same way that the world does, that all of culture does, that if you think differently or you speak differently or you see the world in a different way, that you have dangerous thoughts, violent thoughts, that you shouldn't be allowed to speak and you have to be canceled, and it's dangerous for you to even exist, and we can't be friends and we can't agree on anything because of this one or two things that you think or would even dare to question the way that we do this. And I'm not, again, picking a political side. I'm just saying this is a trend in society that seems to be moving into the church at times, and we need to deal with it before it gets out of control, because nothing will bring more disunity than that. The world is becoming these ideological denominations within churches. So what am I talking about? Well, really, it's just that there's these different things that seem to become more important than the united parts that we agree on. So we'll look at social justice issues. We'll look at political beliefs. We'll say that you can't vote for this side. Well, the other side would say this side can't be voted for either. But somehow we're all at church, and we've all done that. We've all voted for a different side from each other. So do we have to sit on different sides of the church? Do we separate? Do we start a new church over here that's only for people that voted for this party or believe in this ideology or this economic practice, this way of doing your economy? I don't know. Is that good? Probably not. But we're getting there as our society trends in that direction. And again, we need to find ways to serve side by side within our differences. Not to pretend that differences don't exist, but in some ways even just to celebrate that we have differences, but that there is something so much more important than the nuanced ways we navigate a human existence. And that is Jesus. And that is the message of hope that comes from a Jesus-based life. That is the mission and the calling that Jesus has given us as the church. That is the value that comes. That's why we exist. That we would actually celebrate. We are different. But the fact is, there is something so much more important than my preferences in this life. And that is Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for the entire world, and who the whole world may not know it yet, but they need him desperately. They need relationship. And we, as the church, are the hope of the world to communicate that. You and I, not just as a collective group here, individually, we are the hope of the world working together. But if we get distracted, we are going to not be able to achieve that mission. The fact is, a vegan and a hunter can go to the same church. Bear with me. A liberal and a conservative can go to the same church. You can be polarizingly different in your belief system of the world around you and still be united under the banner, under the umbrella of a Jesus-based life. That is okay. Now, is that not going to come without hard conversations or debates or Totally. That's a normal part of life. We're going to have to learn from each other. We may change our minds. And here's the crazy thing. In your 20s, I know this for myself, the way I thought about the world at 20 years old compared to how I think about it at 30 is insane. I would fight myself at this point. I look back at what I believed when I was 20, and I was like, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have posted that on Facebook. To the point where I actually recently deleted my Facebook because there's too much stuff to even filter through. I don't think the same thing. So when we grandstand on something we believe in the moment, we don't allow room for ourselves to grow and evolve the way that we think, let alone to find ways to grow and learn from each other as we talk things through. It's not going to be easy. There will be friction, but that is a part of community. A good community challenges each other. A good community pushes each other and actually works through the ideas and why they believe what they believe, theologically, ideologically, all those things, and we make ourselves better. But if we start to put ourselves into corners and tribalize and section off and say, this is the way we are, we're Christians who are blank. We're Christians who are blank. And we don't associate with the other ones because they are blank. That is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for not achieving what Jesus has called us to do. We need to be on the same team. We need to learn to be okay with diversity, embracing unity, but not demanding uniformity. And that is a really good sounding thing. It sounds like a great thing, and we would probably all love that, but it's hard work to do. Because the trend is uniformity is kind of the thing that's most sought after in our culture today. You can't think differently from each other. If you're on this side and the other side thinks differently, they're the problem. Then there's another group literally at the same time over here saying that the people on this side, they think differently, they're the problem. They can't be trusted. They're not good people. And all that does is create problems. All that does is create division. The lie of our culture is that we're defined by our uniformity in thought, that there's no room for expression in different ways. And we're defined by these issues that don't really matter. But we're actually defined by the unity that comes from faith in Jesus and the freedom that we gain from a relationship with him. That's what we're unified in. That's what we need to focus on. We're living in a world that is so focused on making others, even within the church, seen as them. But the fact is, friends, there is only us. Around the world, there's only us. In the church, there's only us. There's differences. We all come from different cultures. We all do things slightly different. But when we're under the banner of Jesus, there is only us. And we need to live that out. And even when it's hard to love others, we need to choose to love the people that make it really hard to love them because they're the most frustrating and they think the dumbest things. And it's okay to actually think that someone believes something that's dumb, but it's not okay to hate them or to segregate them off or cast them out. And when we do that, when we cast off other people into the obscurity, they are found in the obscurity. And that's where we find people running off into getting into trouble with bad groups, bad situations because they've been shunned. When we shun people, they don't get better. They just get more isolated and more dangerous. The solution to bad ideas is not to shun and to cancel and to push out. It's to bring them into community and talk and share the love that Jesus has with them. Jesus never walked away from anyone. The most socially outcast people, the people that lived the most outside of what was culturally acceptable at the time, he sought them out and he had dinner with them. We need to be able to do that as much as we can in the way that we live out our Christianity as well. Tribalism does not change the world. Tribalism just creates a little segregated pocket for you to feel comfortable and talk bad and gossip about the other groups. The church is a unified body with one unified mission. We are in this together. There is only us. So how is your heart towards other people? Just as far as culture, people that think differently, and then also through the lens of church. Whether you're sitting here in person or whether you're watching online, how do you see others in the world around you? Is your thought process negative? Are you cynical? Do you find yourself hating people that think differently? Even if they may be dangerous in your mind, do you hate them? Is there room? Do you ever pray for those people? Do you spend more time praying for them or thinking about how bad they are? Wishing their destruction or praying for their success or for them to see what you perceive to be the flaws in the way that they believe and the way that they live their life? This is a question for myself as well. It's so easy to just look at someone who's being a complete moron and say, that's a bad person. I'm going to send a text message to my friends. Do you see what this person did or said? Like, that is in us. That's part of us. But do you spend more time complaining internally or to others, or praying and hoping the best and reaching out to people? So I want to give you 3 practical ways that this week, starting right now, that you can choose unity. 3 ways to choose unity, and the first one is make the choice to choose unity. Recognize this: unity is work. It's hard. It's going to take those chafing conversations. It's going to take friction. It's going to have sparks. There's going to be problems. There's going to be disagreements. But at the end of the day, anything that is worth having, it takes work. It's worth work. People are worth work. Others are worth work. The church and unity is worth the work that it takes. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's not the easiest solution, but it's what we're called to. It's what Jesus did, and it's what we need to do to be more like Jesus, which is the goal in life. If we want to reflect Jesus' character and the way he lived, we need to be able to put in the work. And that's a daily choice. It's not just something you do once. It's like, I want to get in shape. I'm going to go to the gym. Well, you can't just go once. You do it once, you feel good about yourself. Congratulations, that's awesome. But if you don't ever go back, you're never going to be healthy. And so for us, we have to choose unity, even though it's difficult, over and over again. Second one is to remind yourself what you have in common. When you are seeing somebody or a group of people or an ideology or a political stance or just a different personality that you are starting to become cynical and bitter, or even, I hate to say it, even starting to hate, you need to recognize their humanity and what you have in common. Remind yourself, first of all, you're humans. You're both broken humans who make mistakes all the time. You have things you believe, even if it's not this thing, that are probably wrong, and you need people to have grace for you. Just like these people and that person in your circumstance needs to have grace. Jesus gave grace to people. Jesus was patient with people, and we need to be able to choose that. Recognize that we are the same, and like I said before, that there's no them, but there's only us. And that's a perspective we choose daily, hourly, moment by moment. We have to choose that. We have more in common than we have that we are not on the same page on. We are more alike than we are against each other. Remind yourself that. Number 3 is humility. This all doesn't work if we're not humble. Arrogance will break the unity of every community. Arrogance and ignorance will destroy the church community. It will destroy our country. It will destroy our culture. And so much of our world's problems are based out of a lack of humility. If we are full of pride, we will never humble ourselves enough to choose unity, because it's way easier, like we've said. A humble heart will grow the church. Humility will find peace. Humility will lead to patience. But ignorance and arrogance will lead to war. So daily, regularly, we need to choose humility and seek that from God daily. Lord, give me humility. And humility is a tough one, right? Because it's kind of like, how do you know if you've achieved humility? It's like, I'm so humble. I'm the best at being humble. Doesn't really work like that, right? You've inherently broken that humility. Humility is something that you give. It's not something that you demand or receive. You give your humility to others. It's a gift that you give to the world around you. It's not something that you demand from others. It's not something that you project. It's something that you give to others. John 13:34 said this, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Jesus is saying here again, our mission is to share the gospel. Our mission is to share the value of a Jesus-based life. That's why we're here. How we engage with each other will give validity or discredit what we are trying to share with the world around us in its greatest moment of need. How we treat each other, how we unify, is absolutely everything. We can act like virtuous human beings, but if we don't love one another, we've diluted the impact that we get to have on the world around us. If the world around us sees us as divided, they're not even going to give us a chance. It doesn't matter what we preach. It doesn't matter what we yell. If we look like we are hypocrites, divided, infighting, who wants to join a team that is at war with itself? We won't even get in the door. We need to learn to live together and to move towards what's important. So, would you stand with me? I want to just pray a bit of a benediction over you. Project, may you be people who walk humbly, who love Jesus with all your heart, who live in ways that project Jesus in a positive light. May you be people who are not known for our differences, but known as people who thought they have differences and know they have differences, but choose to focus on what counts, what unifies them, who choose unity instead of uniformity, who reflect what it means to be a Jesus-based community, a community that transcends politics, preferences, and culture. May you be a true reflection of Jesus' global church.